This is apropos. Well, the Trump administration is already carrying out targeted immigration enforcement actions as part of the crackdown pledged by the newly reinstalled US president. That's according to the White House's new Borders Czar. Separately, more than a dozen Democratic-led states have filed a lawsuit challenging Donald Trump's order to curtail birthright citizenship, a decades-old policy that guarantees that American-born children are US citizens regardless of their parents' legal status. With the latest on the immigration crackdown, here's Emerald Maxwell.
Nidia Montenegro was so close to realizing her dream of a new life in the United States. She'd made it to the border town of Tijuana 3 days before her asylum appointment, scheduled Wednesday, after fleeing violence and poverty at home in Venezuela and surviving a kidnapping as she traveled north into Mexico, just to have it all taken away at the last hurdle when the incoming Trump administration cancelled all appointments.
We don't know what to do. Really, the joy we had, it stops here. We don't know what we're going to do. We're left in limbo.
Nidia is among thousands of migrants who've had their hopes of legally reaching the US dashed suddenly on Monday. Some received emails cancelling their appointments, while others desperately tried to open the US government app, known as CBP One, in vain. It's a crushing disappointment, with many at a loss for what to do next.
Plan B is to stay here. But even here, they're saying that we can't stay, that everyone must go back to their country. They're talking about massive deportations.
Shutting down this legal path to asylum was only one of a raft of measures or executive orders signed off by Donald Trump on Monday. He also ordered an end to birthright citizenship.
It's ridiculous. We're the only country in the world that does this with birthright, as you know.
Which isn't true. Around 30 countries in the world have birthright citizenship, or jus soli, primarily in the Americas. It's also enshrined in the US Constitution and is already facing a legal challenge, something that Trump is no stranger to. But the returning US president will be hoping that since his first term, he will have reshaped the courts enough, having appointed 234 federal judges to reverse decades of established law.
Well, for more, let's cross live to Amanda Frost. She's a professor of law at the University of Virginia in the US. Thanks so much, Amanda, for being with us on the programme this evening. An awful lot to get through here. A raft of new measures being introduced by Donald Trump over the past 24 hours or so. The White House, it says its targeted immigration enforcement actions are already underway. We don't have any details at the moment as to where exactly or what exactly is happening with that. Can individual states intervene here? What kind of protections do these people who are going to be targeted, who are being targeted, actually have?
Yes, well, there's two groups. One, of course, are people at the border, like the woman that you just interviewed in the last clip, and they can be barred from entering and have been barred from entering for the most part, those who were seeking asylum and had those appointments under CBP One app. There's also people living in the United States who are either undocumented or have what you sort of think of as a quasi-legal status. Maybe they're waiting for asylum or they're so-called dreamers, deferred action for childhood arrival recipients. Those people all could be targeted for enforcement and removal, and states have limited ability to protect them. They don't have to help the government remove them, but they can't hinder the government from removing them. So it really is a matter of the government's will and the amount of enforcement resources Congress is willing to allocate to the executive to accomplish this goal.
And as for enlisting local law enforcement officers into carrying out these orders, can they actually be forced to do so, or does that depend on them volunteering, so to speak, agreeing to cooperate?
States cannot be forced to assist the federal government in immigration enforcement. There's a principle in U.S. government federalism that says the federal government can hire people and enforce its laws, but it can't force the states to do so. That said, the federal government can be coercive. It gives a lot of federal funds to states, and it could try to condition that funding on state cooperation in immigration enforcement.
And when we heard Donald Trump talking about planning to deploy troops and soldiers to control immigration, what kind of hurdles does he face in putting those kind of plans into place if he is going to do so? And what kind of legal requirements are there? What can the military actually do in this kind of situation?
So this is a legally uncertain area. We're treading on new ground, as we so often are, with Donald Trump and immigration, Donald Trump in a lot of areas. And so it's a question. There's something called the Posse Comitatus Act, which limits the use of the military domestically in the United States for good reasons. That said, there are exceptions to those limitations, and it's possible the military can legally be deployed at the border. I'm certain there'll be some legal challenges, and I'm also certain the Trump administration is going to plow ahead with efforts to use the military because the resources allocated for immigration enforcement fall far short of the number of people. Donald Trump was president once before, and he did not change the numbers on the ground. There was 11 million undocumented immigrants when he came into office and 11 million when he left. So he already failed once to reduce that number, and I'm not confident he'll be more successful this time, but he'll try.
And Amanda, another thing that he's trying to do, again, just before we came on air, the Trump administration saying that it was reinstating the Remain in Mexico program that had been paused by Joe Biden. What kind of impact is that going to have? Is that something that you would have been expecting to see?
Yes, I was expecting. I have to say, one thing Trump was transparent. He and his advisors, Stephen Miller, among others, were very vocal about what they were planning to do, and they did it, or they're starting to try to do it. So the Remain in Mexico program was also known as MPP, Migration Protocol, that just said if you're seeking asylum, you cannot come into the U.S. You have to wait until in Mexico until you have an appointment with an immigration official to claim asylum in the U.S. And you're not allowed to wait in the United States to do that. That program was put in place at the end of the Trump administration and remained in place part of the Biden administration. I think one of the questions is, what is Mexico going to do? Mexico is a sovereign nation with its own foreign policy goals and interests, and it has to play a role here, and Trump has to try to appeal to them. So that's an unknown for me about reinstating that program, but Trump says he'll do it.
And it's also going to be interesting to see how individual states inside the US respond. We've already seen lawsuits being filed to block Donald Trump's actions when it comes to the birthright issue. At least 18 Democrat-led states saying that they're filing lawsuits against that. So what kind of actual constitutional right does Donald Trump have to impose these kind of measures?
So this is one area in which the U.S. Constitution speaks very clearly, and it says that all persons born in the United States are citizens. Very narrow exceptions for the children of diplomats. So the French ambassador in the United States, that person's child wouldn't be a birthright citizen, but everybody else is. And the question is, are immigrants and undocumented immigrants subject to the jurisdiction of the United States? That's the language in the 14th Amendment. Yes, of course they are. They have to follow all U.S. laws, and so their children are born citizens. I think Donald Trump is going more for the rhetoric here than the reality. I think this lawsuit will quickly stay his executive order, and likely the executive order will fail as a matter of violating the constitutional law. But we'll see. Donald Trump has also appointed a lot of judges and will appoint probably a justice before he leaves office.
Yeah, and some analysts are saying that these measures, many of them will actually reduce legal migration rather than illegal migration. Is that something you would agree with, Samantha?
I would agree with that, in part because the U.S. has been, certainly under the last Trump administration, a hostile place for even legal immigrants. And many Trump administration officials say they are opposed to legal as well as undocumented immigration. And of course, people that come legally tend to have other options. They have other attractive countries they could immigrate to, even if they want to leave their home country, that are more welcoming. Canada, France, among them. So I think we might lose some legal immigration. Undocumented immigrants tend to be desperate, and they're fleeing for really good reasons. And I should add, U.S. citizens employ undocumented immigrants. And while the law prohibits them from doing so, no administration seems to enforce the law against the U.S. citizens that employ undocumented immigrants, including Trump's last administration.
And also, are we going to see all migrants being treated equally here, or are these laws really just targeting certain communities and people coming from certain countries?
Oh, yes. I mean, there's a long history of that. Shameful American history of targeting certain racial groups over the course of, starting with the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882, going to the massive roundup of Mexicans and Mexican Americans even in the 1930s and the 1950s. I suspect some similar racial targeting and country-specific targeting will occur again.
And what kind of support does Donald Trump have? I mean, People did know what they were getting themselves into, really, when they decided to vote for him. So how is all of this being greeted by ordinary citizens in America?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say I have my fingers on the pulse of every American, but I will say that clearly the atmosphere has changed in the United States, in the sense that I think that Biden did mishandle the border at times, that there were too many people coming across post-COVID. It wasn't entirely his fault. It was a built-up demand. And they did put in place, the Biden administration did put in place limits that really worked, but they came too late for the voters. So I think there is a sense in the United States that we need to control the southern border, and I think there's some support for that. However, I think there's not support for tearing children from parents, for the kind of inhumanity that we may see if we see mass raids and deportations. And I think Americans don't realize how many of their neighbors, their friends, their colleagues, people that live among them, attend the church, their kids attend the school, how many of those people are at risk? And I think when those people start being deported, Americans might react very negatively. They'll also react negatively if their food costs more. And if you deport all the undocumented immigrants who harvest our crops, you're going to pay more for milk and eggs and food at the store.
Amanda, we'll have to leave it there for now, but thank you so much for being with us this evening and for all your analysis there. That is Amanda Frost. She is a professor of law at the University of Virginia. Well, that's it from us for now.